I want to hear cannons. Outfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the heads in the shot. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast, live on YouTube today. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, as always, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. Today, we have got a lot to talk about, breaking down the Tampa Bay Buccaneers preseason loss on the road to the Jacksonville Jaguars Saturday night. 20-7, your final score in that game. And as the title implies, Evan, the Bucs showed us a lot of things. They showed us some good, a lot of bad, and a lot of downright ugly. We are going to highlight pretty much everything we can today, but we got a stacked show, a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and, obviously, like we've said multiple times here, the final score doesn't really matter, right? So the fact that the Bucs are 1-1 in the preseason, the fact that they won last week, the fact that they lost this past week doesn't really matter. It's about evaluating the players, right, in the preseason. How are these guys doing? The guys that are fighting for roster spots, the guys that have their roster spots secured, but maybe are fighting for a certain role on the team. So that's what you want to see. And I do think the Bucs saw some encouraging signs from some of those guys that are fighting for spots, whether it will be on the team or just in general in a role. But then you also saw some things where you're like, you'd like to see a better performance there. Especially guys that I think are more so on the side of fighting for a role on this team, are probably going to make the team, just need to find that role. Those were the guys that somewhat struggled last night. So that wasn't great to see. But again, it is preseason. They got one more shot, right? I would expect the starters to play a little bit on Friday night against Miami. I would assume. I wouldn't agree with it at all if the starters just didn't play at all in the preseason. I'm not a proponent of that. I think your starters need to play at least once. So we'll see if they play. But yeah, I mean, like you said, there was good, bad, and ugly. So all around the board for a lot of different players. So excited to get into it.
Yeah, a tale of two games so far in the preseason for Tampa Bay. At least for the offense, it was tough sledding in Jacksonville. They had over 300 yards of total offense last week against Cincinnati. We were talking about the run game, and we can still do that, but definitely seems like it was much harder for them to move the football this week. And on the defensive side of the ball, you had a pass rush that stepped up, showed some great things after last week, kind of asking where those guys had been. Jose Ramirez with the hat trick gets 3 sacks. A couple of other guys go back there and eat as well. But the rest of the defense seems like there were just breakdowns in discipline, breakdowns in communication, which ultimately lead to breakdowns in coverage. And we saw guys like C.J. Beathard and Mac Jones throw all over this Buccaneers secondary. So we will talk about that here shortly. Before we do, got a couple of headlines from today that we should cover before breaking down the game. It was announced last night on the WFLA broadcast by Chris Myers and Rondé Barber that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have agreed to a deal with Randy Gregory to let him go. Kind of a high drama release for the team. I haven't heard a ton about how they have to cut a deal with a guy to let him go. No details yet on how the Bucs will work out things with Randy Gregory to agree to release him and stop the accrual of fines, but he has at least $800,000 in 50,000 day fines mandatory by the collective bargaining agreement. He's got $102,000 worth of fines for missing minicamp, plus 2 game checks at $75,833 each for missing preseason games. Now, the Bucs can recover his signing bonus, which can offer some financial relief in the grand scheme of his contract down the stretch. But again, the official release of Randy Gregory does not point to the Buccaneers going after a Hassan Reddick or really any of these big-name free agent outside linebackers that might be left out there. Todd Bowles said this morning that he feels like the depth at outside linebacker is as good as any other area on the team. So the departure of Randy Gregory, Jose Ramirez having 3 sacks last night. There is a lot to be talked about with this Buccaneers pass rush between today and the start of week 1, Evan.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, I don't know. I don't even know how to talk about the Randy Gregory thing because it's just so strange, like didn't even show up to a practice, like never actually put on a Bucs helmet, it was all so strange. And like you said, like the best free agent remaining right now is Yannick Ngakoue. Now what I would say is, while it may not open up the door for anything right now, right? Like signing a Ngakoue, trading for Hassan Reddick, even though I would be a proponent of both. I think just similar as we talked about after Suo-Opeta went down at the guard spot, I think this could open up when teams start to make their final cuts. Does a guy get cut, right? Does a outside linebacker, a pass rusher that you're not expecting to get cut, does he get released? Carl Nassib wasn't released by the Cleveland Browns, and the Buccaneers picked him up off waivers. So is there something like that could be in play here? That's what I wonder. I mean, the depth, it definitely helped last night, right? To further Bowles' point of that he feels good about the depth. Jose Ramirez having 3 sacks. 2 of them were just be there first and fall on the guy almost, but they still count, right? They still count. I Bleav Marquise Watts also got a sack. So I mean, a lot of the young depth for Tampa really showed up last night, and 2 guys that we talked about as sort of them developmental guys showed up. So yeah, I mean, do they absolutely need Randy Gregory? No, but I think it would have been nice to have him in the fold, right? There's a reason they added him. Clearly they felt like he could give them something. It's just unfortunate that at the time, I think it was April 3rd or something, when there was probably a lot more pass rushers available. Yeah. They seemingly picked the wrong one. I just don't know where this went wrong. Like, is it like, did the front office not do enough due diligence, or did something come out of left field, or I don't quite understand it. So it's strange.
Yeah, something must have changed. I mean, we've talked highly these last couple of seasons about the front office, and especially how they judge character of any player who steps foot into the building. I mean, from Jason Light's draft selection process to the type of player that he's looking for to even some of these fringe undrafted free agents. The Bucs typically want a certain type of player, and I feel like they've usually had a good process of reading those people out. And if anyone has become a problem, they're usually not here very long. But yeah, I don't know how to address it either. But the fact of the matter is, Randy Gregory officially no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer after this week. So we can close the book on that saga and look forward to what the rest of this pass rush has to do to get ready for week 1. Couple of injury updates before we dive into the game. No update on Kayvon Merriweather, who left the game last night, seemingly with a knee injury. Kind of got rolled up on by his own teammates. Looked painful, and you don't love to hear that for a guy who has had a pretty strong training camp, pretty strong preseason as well. Kayvon Merriweather been making some plays, hoping it is not that serious. And then Todd Bowles was asked about quarterback John Walford's ribs injury today after leaving the game last night. He said he didn't know, but didn't expect the Bucs to try and bring in a QB to try to pick things up for Friday's preseason finale. So, as of now, next Friday, the Bucs are looking to go with Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, and John Walford. Now, maybe this gives you a little bit of insight into how much they're expecting to play the starters. Maybe you get a full quarter, maybe you get a full first half, potentially, of Baker Mayfield, and then Todd Bowles is comfortable with letting Kyle Trask close things out. But as far as the John Walford injury goes, Bucs don't expect it to be anything severely long-term.
No, and I think that also Bowles saying they're not expected to add anyone is, again, like you said, sort of a clue that Baker Mayfield's going to play at least a little bit on Friday night. So, because if it was just going to be Kyle Trask and John Walford, I think maybe you do then add somebody just to have another guy there. So, I think... Again, Walford hasn't looked great this preseason. He looked much better last preseason and in particular last training camp, but depth is depth, and especially at the quarterback position, you never know what's going to happen, and a guy can go down at any point, so you want to make sure that your depth is actually healthy. So Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how much. I mean, Bowles didn't seem too concerned even post game last night. Reiterated that today, so we'll see how much Walford plays on Friday night, if at all. I mean, it may be Mayfield and Trask, but we'll have to wait and see.
20-7, your final score last night from Jacksonville, and I mean, I've seen other people say this. I've been thinking it myself, Evan. After last week's exciting finish in Cincinnati, this feels like one of the more boring preseason games I have watched in quite some time. Now, we do have some highlights to talk about, obviously, some players who stepped up, who needed to step up. A couple of guys on defense who needed a big game, had a big game, and I'm excited to talk about that. But outside of that, holy hell. I mean, towards the end of the game, the Bucs were still only down by 6 points. I think it was 13-7 at one point. Felt like it should have been 27-7. I think the execution errors that we will dive into here, I guess are exemplary of a tough week in Jacksonville. I came into this preseason game not hoping for a win because, again, preseason score doesn't matter. But I was hoping for some kind of effort the Bucs could hang their hat on at the end of the week. And outside of this defensive line, it just doesn't seem like there was any facet of this Bucs team that was fully prepared for the Jags.
No, and I sort of look at the joint practices that they had, right, and how lopsided those seemingly were. And I mean, we weren't there, we didn't get to witness them firsthand, but what you can read is you can infer how they went. And basically they weren't good, right? You did a show with JC Allen, talking about, the joint practice. If you want to go back and relive that, you can go back and check that podcast out right now. But they weren't good. And then I feel like Saturday night was kind of like a continuation, just the third joint practice, basically. Because that's what it pretty much looked like. So like you said, there were some guys that look good. I thought Sean Tucker again put together a pretty nice day. That one run, the long run that he had, 21 yards, that was probably the best run I've ever seen him have. Yeah. That was really good. So Sean Tucker continues. I think seemingly has locked his spot up, on the roster. I don't see him going anywhere. And he's a guy that needed a strong preseason because I think, he was on the bubble. If somebody else stepped up and he really didn't, I think, he might have been on the bubble. Bucky Irving, fine, hit the holes hard, got some work early on. I think you saw some of that tackle breaking ability that he has, which is important, I think, especially with the role that I envision the Bucs have for him, which is maybe more of a short yardage guy, a guy like, we need a yard, try and go get it. So I think that was good. And then, pretty much it's like Cody Thompson, that's it on offense. Like, I mean, Cody Thompson had a really nice day, 5 receptions, 66 yards, a touchdown. And he made some tough catches too. The tough thing about Cody Thompson is he's in a wide receiver room that is not easy to break, right? Not easy to break into. So I would say he's probably more of a practice squad guy, right? And like, if he continues this, are you going to be able to sneak him on the practice squad? That's the thing. So, because, you obviously have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Sterling Shepard. A lot of people are forgetting about Sterling Shepard, I think, because he hasn't played in the preseason, but he's still here. Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, him making the team, he might have to have another. I mean, Raheem Jarrett not playing in the game, hurts his stock. Because I think the Bucs really do like him. And I think the leaderboard in the wide receiver 6, I know, in the grand scheme of things, it's insignificant, but wide receiver 6, this is preseason, folks. That's why you talk about wide receiver 6. I would say Jarrett was probably the top of that, right? It was probably in the leader in the clubhouse. So we'll see if Cody Thompson, maybe with another nice performance, that he breaks into that. Maybe he makes that a little interesting. But other than that, I didn't see anything on offense. I mean, Kyle Trask taking that sack at the end of the game is awful. I mean, it is terrible. I don't care if it's preseason or not. You have to get rid of that football. I don't understand that.
He needed that drive so badly. I mean, we can talk about the quarterbacks a little more in depth here in a second, but Kyle Trask, I was rooting for him more on that 2-minute drive than I have, I think, maybe ever. After
he looked good up to
after
that
the
point.
game that both of these quarterbacks had, it was nice to see them actually do something with the 2-minute drill. I know that they can march down the field, score a touchdown. It doesn't change the outcome of the game, but I would have liked to see execution. I know that there was a penalty down in the red zone. It kind of set them some extra downs, a closer shot at the end zone. But up until that point, it didn't seem like you had an offensive line that could block cohesively, consistently. It didn't seem like you had receivers who could consistently catch the ball. They were dropping passes left and right. They were out of position, slipping down on the field. It was ridiculous. So Kyle Trask needed that drive more than I think anybody in the stadium did. We'll talk about that here shortly. But let's talk about the offense here. And I want to talk about the running backs very quickly. Bucky Irving, you said briefly, they went to him early. I think we know what to expect from Bucky here. We know what his usage is going to be for the rest of the preseason because he's been the hot hand these first 2 weeks here. But you feel like you know what to expect with him. Hope to see that develop. But Sean Tucker, talking a little bit more about that 21-yard scamper from him. I think the most impressive thing about that run and a couple of other plays that he's made so far this preseason is his ability to change direction. The play collapsed to the right. He jumps over the entire line of scrimmage and runs to the left. He was also picking up kickoff return duties as well. I think the Bucs are trying to iron out.
He made a pretty nice return. Yeah,
Bucs still trying to iron out who that guy is going to be. And we talk about the personnel of kick return, and I think with the new kick rules, the personnel could be a little different than what a lot of people expected the norm to be. You kind of think of a Hall of Fame Devin Hester as the prototypical kick returner. That might not be what gets the job done anymore. It's a different technique, different rules, almost a different game altogether on the NFL kickoff nowadays. But props to Sean Tucker. I enjoyed watching him this preseason, and props to Bucky Irving. I like watching him run the football. But let's talk a little bit more about the rest of the offense here. We'll get into the quarterbacks. It was a tough night for either quarterback. I mean, plenty of drops from your wide receivers. You had an offensive line that seemingly tried to take out a hit on John Walford as the game went on. They could not protect him at all in that second half. I don't think Walford set his feet the entire evening. He looked poised last week against Cincinnati, and he came into this game after Trask went out in the second half, and guy was just running for his life. I didn't feel like he was able to find a second to get composed back there, and it ultimately leads to him taking a nasty hit, leaving the game with a lot of people assumed a neck injury, but come to find out it's a rib injury. Doesn't seem to be that serious, but you can't have your quarterbacks getting hit like that in the regular season. And it made it tough for either one of these guys to do anything with the football. John Walford on the night, 7 for 14, 52 yards. And Kyle Trask, I like the way he started. I know it was nothing exciting, but he was taking care of the football. He started that game in that first half, 8 for 13. He comes back in after the Walford injury, finishes 12 for 19, 108 yards, and a touchdown. Also have to give Trask props on that touchdown pass. He had to improvise, and I've kind of criticized him before with his ability to make plays happen after the initial play is taken away. And I thought he did a really nice job there. Good improvisation, scrambles away from pressure, hits Cody Thompson on the run. Again, the wide receiver who had the biggest night of all, I think. And at that time, it ties the score up 7-7. Evan, your thoughts on the QB Saturday night?
Yeah, I want to talk about that touchdown for a minute. Yeah, because like you said, when the biggest thing with Trump, because look, like he's not the most athletic guy in the world, right? So when things break down and he has to go off schedule a little bit, that's when you run into trouble. And unfortunately, that's probably why he's not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, because as a starting quarterback in the NFL, you need to be able to play off schedule. Like you have to. I'm not saying you have to have Lamar Jackson's speed, but you have to be able to adjust, right? Adjust on the fly like that in the moment. And we've seen it now this is the fourth preseason of Kyle Trask. Like we've seen this too much. So like, you kind of know what he is, right? Like you kind of know like what he's going to bring to the table. And unfortunately, it's not something that is probably NFL starter material. John Walford, like I mentioned earlier, I thought had a really good camp last year. I thought had a really good preseason last year. Hasn't really held it up, as much this year. Obviously, like you said, the offensive line really breaking down. The good news I will share for Bucs fans is, At that point in the game, a lot of the offensive linemen that were out there may not even be on the team in about 2 weeks. So, you don't have to completely worry about that, but it is a little bit worrisome depth wise, so it look, Walford's on a 1-year deal. Trask is a free agent after the season. It wouldn't surprise me, like, if the Bucs have 2 new quarterbacks behind Baker Mayfield next year. Like, it wouldn't be a big surprise. They're both interchangeable at this point. You know what both are. And look, Trask, I know people are going to say, "Oh, it's a waste of a second-round pick." I get it. It is. Like, it is. He never started a game for you as a second-round pick. Like, that's bad. But at the same time, I understand the reasoning behind it. Just didn't work out. And I think in an ideal world for them, Tom Brady retires and they have enough faith in Kyle Trask to just put him in. And, hopefully Trask is playing above average or, pretty decent, and they can roll with that, right? Maybe he's giving you similar production to what Baker Mayfield gave you last year. Not perfect, but pretty good, right? And they don't have to find a Baker Mayfield. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So they saw what they saw in practice all them times with, the 2 years that Trask sat behind Brady. Didn't like what they saw, and they decided to essentially move on from Kyle Trask right then and there, in my opinion. That was when they decided to move. As soon as they signed Baker Mayfield, that was when they moved on from Kyle Trask. So I'm sorry for all the Florida Gator fans in here that are big Kyle Trask fans. I get it. But, he's had his moments, but it just doesn't seem like many more moments are going to be coming at Tampa Bay after the season.
There were a couple of nice throws from him last night. Hit Cody Thompson over the top, put it right in the bucket, far sideline throw. That was a thing of beauty. Tanner Canoe, 5 receptions, 33 yards. Cody Thompson, your leading receiver, 5 receptions, 66 yards.
There's talent there. Like, there's he wasn't a Heisman finalist for nothing.
Right.
Like there's talent there. It's just in the NFL, you need to do a little bit more nowadays, and he just doesn't quite.
And in the grand scheme of the preseason, when you're talking about the sample size, you've got to be more consistent. I think it's a lack of consistency as well that's going to push a lot of people to want to move on. After they've seen enough from 4 preseasons.
He had that nice 2-minute drive, and then it ends with him taking an awful sack. Like, you have to throw that football away. I don't like you do. You cannot take that sack. You have no timeouts. There's seconds remaining. Yes, I know. If they scored a touchdown, it would have made it 20-14, whatever. You still lose, but that's not the point. Like, you need to. You have to be more aware than that, and that's how it ended for him.
Yeah, I mean, the point of the preseason a lot of the times is situational execution for these units. And the Buccaneers offense on the field, I loved what I saw starting that 2-minute period. And again, I think if Kyle Trask had finished that drive with a touchdown, even though the Bucs would have lost the game either way, people would have been talking about that. And I think his work with the offense in a much more positive light, considering he stepped in after Walford goes down. He steps in, the offense starts clicking immediately. They make their way down the field. They even get an extra penalty from Jacksonville to set up a fresh set of downs in the red zone. They just can't come away with it. So disappointing to see that. But another thing to mention about this offense, and in particular the offensive line, you talked about these guys who were playing in the 3rd and the 4th quarter who aren't even going to make the team. Let's talk about the guys who are potentially going to make the team, but were playing in different positions altogether. Bucs head coach Todd Bowles talked about after the game, Elijah Klein being one of those gritty and tough players, said he'll play anywhere on both the offensive line, or he'll play anywhere on the line after playing both guard and tackle on the offensive line against Jacksonville on Saturday night. Brandon Walton, also one of those guys. He's a guard getting work at tackle. Brandon Walton was in at tackle last night, Evan, and I don't know how much longer the Bucs are going to try and make Brandon Walton at tackle a thing, but last night he did not look good.
This is the second straight game, right, where he just has not really looked up to snuff. He's had his moments in the regular season. I remember he filled in in the 2022 season. He filled in for Donovan Smith, at times, and played pretty well. But it's a "what have you done for me lately" league, and what Brandon Walton has done lately is not great. So I don't think he's going to get cut. I don't think he's in danger of that, but definitely worrisome for the depth of his offensive line because Brandon Walton's going to be one of those first guys off the bench. Anything happens to a guy like Tristan Wirfs or Luke Gedeke, like Brandon Walton's probably going to be the dude at tackle. So that is a little bit worrisome for sure.
Your buddy Devin Culp had a nice catch and run last night, set the Bucs
He's
down
good
on 1st and goal. Yeah, he stepped up, played well. Sal Cannella, who's been having a rough preseason, had a couple of catches towards the end of the game as well. But final thoughts on the offense here before we move to the other side of the football.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough to fully evaluate because they're not game plan to beat that Jacksonville defense, right? They're not. They're just trying to work on things, right? They're just trying to, all right, what does Liam Cohen think they need to get better at? Okay, they're going to try and do this. So it is tough to truly evaluate, but you'd like to see some of those players playing better, right? You'd like to see Kyle Trask finish off that 2-minute drill. You'd like to see Brandon Walton play a little bit better. You'd like to see John Walford play better. You'd like to see more of the backup offensive linemen play better. I think you'd like to see receivers, get more consistent, with catching the football. Not having your leading receiver be Cody Thompson. I think you'd like to see a little more splash there, I guess you could say. But it is what it is. It's you got one more preseason game and then the real thing starts. So just kind of see what they give you on Friday night. And but like I said, not too. I don't think the sky is falling because look, it is largely backups. You're hoping that you're not going to see many of these guys in regular season, right? Like if you do, things are in trouble. So I'm not going to say, like I said, the sky is falling. His offense is terrible, but it is something that, like the overall depth, right? If they do suffer injuries, which it's football, people are going to get hurt. You hope it's not at certain spots because if it's at a particular spot, the quarterback position, I mean, that goes for almost any NFL team, but the quarterback position, the tackle position, like the guard position, like if any of those go down, they could be in a tough spot, this coming season. So that's the only thing I think you could potentially be worried about. But we'll have to wait and see how they fare on Friday night.
Before we talk about the Bucs playmakers on defense, it is the perfect time to remind you guys that the Cannon Fire podcast. Let me go ahead and minimize that so you can't see the live the live chat there. The Cannon Fire podcast is brought to you by our good friends at Autograph. It is an app that curates the best content, tickets, and gear to help you fan to your full potential. Evan, as you know, being a fan is a full-time job, so Autograph does all the heavy lifting for you. From tickets for big matchups to breaking news, the Autograph app has curated all content for fans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All the podcasts, articles, and game predictions you could ever want, including the Cannon Fire podcast. The new replay feature lets you get the day's news without your noise for when you need the TLDR to start your day. Use promo code BUCS to download for free on Google Play or the Apple App Store today. Once again, promo code BUCS, B-U-C-S. You can see it all over this screen right here. What is Autograph? It is what you already do as a fan. Reading blogs, listening to podcasts, watching breakdowns, all in one place, earning you rewards for every active fandom that you do. The Autograph app is completely free and available on Android and iOS. Currently features NBA, WNBA, MLB, NFL, fantasy football, and even NCAA sports with college creeping up just around the corner. College football season going to be starting here soon. So it's an exciting time to get on the Autograph app. Don't forget promo code BUCS, B-U-C-S, and you can find us on there. It is an incredible community, really around any team. I mean, if you're not a Bucs fan and you're watching this show for whatever reason, still use promo code BUCS. But go check out the Jaguars community. Go check out the Bengals community. Go check out the Giants community if you really want to. It might make you feel better about what the Buccaneers preseason game looked like last night. But thank you again to Autograph for being an official partner of the Cannon Fire podcast. Evan, let's talk about the MVP from last night. You can't talk about the defense without talking about the top-tier performance from Jose Ramirez. He had a hat trick for himself last night. And I know we can classify a couple of these as coverage sacks, but 3 sacks for Jose Ramirez after a strong performance against Cincinnati last week. He was great. Even when he wasn't getting a coverage sack, as some would call it, he was all over the quarterback, whether it was Mac Jones or C.J. Beathard. Seemed like 33 was all over the field last night.
Yeah, and look, Jose Ramirez was a guy I liked last year. Didn't make the roster last year, but they were able to get him on the practice squad, and he's a guy that maybe he's developing into something, right? It's 3 sacks, and look, when you look at his preseason totals at the end of the preseason, they're going to be skewed a little bit because he did have all of them in one game. But again, the Buccaneers have needed one of those younger guys to sort of step up, right? The Marquise Watts, the Jose Ramirez, a guy like Chris Braswell, somebody like somebody. They need somebody to step up this season. Is it Jose Ramirez? Can you completely rely on him? I don't know. Or do you really want to put all your eggs in the Jose Ramirez basket? Who knows, right? I'm not saying they have to, right? Because it is a lot to ask, right? It's not like it's not like this guy was a former second round pick, I mean, he's picked in the 6th round last year. So is he the savior? Probably not. But can he be solid depth for a team that I think needs it? Todd Bowles, man, him saying about, the depth, I feel the depth's the good at, the outside linebacker position better than whatever on the team. I don't see it. I mean, I don't see it. I know you're not going to go out there and say, yeah, well, our depth sucks, but I personally don't agree. So we'll see. I would be looking to add a pass rusher to replace Randy Gregory, but it is nice that Jose Ramirez is a guy that could potentially factor into that depth for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no better time for him to have a preseason like this. I think, he has his preseason a couple of years ago. It's obviously still impressive, but you're talking more about the depth of that room at the time. With the Randy Gregory situation playing out the way that it did, I mean, the timing on the television broadcast could not have been any better because Chris Myers and Rondé Barber officially made the announcement, and then Jose Ramirez immediately gets a sack. So very strong preseason for him, and you kind of talked about how, I don't think anyone's expecting him to show up on this Bucs roster and get 8, 9, 10 sacks. It's just not going to happen, right? But
no.
I think
he's not going to get enough playing time for that anyway. So.
Yeah, and if he does, I think he is truly an anomaly because if this guy's coming off of the bench, a 6th-round pick, and he's getting double-digit sacks, that would be one hell of a story. He'd be one of the most talked-about players in the NFL, but I don't believe it happens that way. You obviously never know. Any given Sunday, he could be the next Shaq Barrett. You don't know until the regular season starts. But what you can take away from it right now is that, yes, this is a guy deep down on the depth chart who is making a name for himself. That defensive line, regardless of who was out there, needed to step up last week after not getting to the quarterback, and he did just that. So Jose Ramirez, 3 sacks, plenty of pressures. I thought Chris Braswell had a pretty good night. On that first sack for Jose Ramirez, the right tackle was getting absolutely worked by Braswell. It seemed like he had a lot more wins this week on that defensive line. You love to see that. There was a nasty sack. I thought C.J. Beathard got killed. Number 75, and I know I'm probably saying this name incorrectly, but that is Lawal Ugok, I believe. Yeah, I don't know. But he absolutely laid the hammer down on C.J. Beathard, and then I don't believe it counted as a sack. But Tyke Smith with an impressive play early in the game. Now, this is probably, I think, the most good I'm going to say about the secondary today on the show. But Tyke Smith did make an impressive play at the start of the game. He lines up on the far sideline. Mac Jones has to scramble to the right. And Tyke Smith basically juked the running back, chased Mac Jones all the way down, and was able to wrap him up at the line of scrimmage. I don't think it was a sack. I think it was
not, no.
Yeah, either a tackle for loss or a no-gain play, but impressive hustle, and excited to see him get into the backfield more. I think his ability to get around the running back was impressive because he had to get around the running back and still had ground to make up to go catch Mac Jones, who isn't the fastest, but he still caught him, so I love to see that. Marquise Watts, another guy who had to step up last week, did register a sack as well. So some more depth at that outside linebacker.
Young depth. That's the big key there. Yeah. It's not like these washed up veterans. They're just cleaning up. It's guys that the Buccaneers are hoping to develop. So hopefully, they do continue to develop and they can, if not maybe make an impact this season, make you feel a little bit better about what the Buccaneers have behind Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson. Because, Yaya Diaby's already hurt. And, he's probably not going to miss much time, if any, but he's already hurt. So, again, if football, the injuries are going to happen. Guys are going to miss time. And what if, Diaby gets hurt again? Or what if it's a longer recovery time? Or Joe Tryon-Shoyinka goes down? One of these guys may be thrown into the fold a little bit more than expected then. So, it is nice to see.
Yeah, we can talk about the run game as well. I thought the run defense started out okay. I don't have the best grasp on just how many starters were out there for Jacksonville to start the game, but Brightwell 9 carries for 43 yards, Tank Bigsby 10 carries for 37 yards. I mean, it is what it is, right? I think the conversation that we really do need to have is less about the run game and more about this secondary. It was it was tough sledding. It really was tough sledding. I mean, Mac Jones basically went out there and went to work. I know it was lackluster, but there was one pass. I think it was to Brian Thomas. He was off target a little bit. Receiver couldn't look it in, but he was wide ass open, 27 yards down the field. And it seemed like a lot of the times those were the plays the Bucs were giving up more than anything else. You could get decent pressure on the quarterback. You could stop a run for 3, 4, 5 yards, but when it's 3rd and 15 after a sack and you can't get off of the field, you've got drives like the one that took place in the second quarter. I think it was a defensive series for the Bucs. Took 10 minutes off of the clock. It ends with a huge breakdown in the secondary. Mac Jones hits Parker Washington over the top, right down the middle.
On a 3rd and long.
Right. A miscommunication, guys in the wrong position. It just seems like there wasn't much the secondary could do to bounce back after, being exposed early. It seemed like it was a long night for them. Couldn't get off of the field.
My worry is 2 guys in the secondary. It's 2 guys that the Buccaneers signed this offseason, Tavierre Thomas and Bryce Hall. Bryce Hall had the interception. Only had the interception because he was called for defensive pass interference. Tavierre Thomas, he was a guy who actually has had a really good camp, but he, I think, figures to be like firmly in the nickel role, perhaps, like especially to start the season, maybe. He looked lost out there. So that was a big concern for me. I mean, the entire, like you talk about the communication issues, these guys look like they had never played with each other ever in this defense, so I'm sure Todd Bowles is not pleased with that. I understand that a lot of people say it's a complex system, right? Oh, it's a tough system to learn. It asks a lot of players in the secondary. I get it. But Tavierre Thomas, too many times, the dude just looked like he was on another planet, and not in a good way. So that's worrisome because he's a guy who I think is actually going to play a decent amount for the Buccaneers in 2024.
Yeah, on one drive alone, I think the drive we were just talking about, the Jags were able to convert a 3rd and 15, a 3rd and 9. There was another 3rd down conversion that they had that didn't end up counting due to a penalty against Jacksonville, but regardless, they were going to move the ball. I think the most disappointing thing about the secondary's performance is after hearing all week how good they've been communicating. It seems like the last couple of weeks there's been multiple articles, reports. I know for a fact that there have been reports out there because I've read them on the show about how well these guys have been communicating. That is a huge part of a Todd Bowles defense. When you got the starters like KJ Britt and Antoine Winfield out there, they're the loudest guys on the field just because of all the things they have to manage and tell everybody to be prepared for. But yeah, you talked about Tavierre Thomas, the lack of communication, looking like he was on a different planet at times out there. He wasn't the only defensive back out there who had a rough night. But after hearing about the improvements in communication and how these guys seemingly communicated well during a tough week of practice against Jacksonville, seeing this in the game was much more disappointing.
And again, it's I'm singling out Thomas because I think he's one of the guys that is going to play. Like
you're going to see him the most, yeah.
Yeah,
you're not going to see Josh Hayes and Andrew Hayes,
right? Like I can't sit here and say, well, I mean, yeah, he got burnt, but if you see Tavierre Thomas, that's probably not a good sign. No, like he might play like a lot. So like you need him to be good. Like Bryce Hall, like might play a decent amount. What if Zion McCollum really struggles? Jamel Dean, he's injury prone. Like he's gonna get banged up most likely. Bryce Hall is probably gonna step in for one of those outside corner spots. You need one of those guys to step up, and both of them did not look good. So again, like you mentioned, yeah, like a guy like Andrew Hayes. Andrew Hayes probably isn't going to be on the team much longer. Like, probably going to be a part of the cuts. And I know that a lot of people are going to be worried about the secondary because a lot of people are already worried about the starters in the secondary, right? Not so much the safeties. We know what Antoine Winfield brings. We know what Jordan Whitehead brings, but Jamel Dean, people will say, well, he's injury prone and inconsistent. That's true. Like that he has his moments where he's good, but then he has his moments where he's not so good, and he also can get banged up. But the people I think are more worried about Zion McCollum, right? Because there's people that don't believe he can take that other step that the Buccaneers are hoping. And I know Stephon Gilmore, I think, got signed today by the Minnesota Vikings. There's people clamoring to sign him. Like, look, and you may disagree with this, that's fine. But like the Buccaneers, the Buccaneers, they believe in Zion McCollum. So it doesn't really matter what we think, right? If I think they need to go out and sign this guy and sign this guy, it doesn't really matter. Like they like Zion McCollum. Could they be wrong? Sure, absolutely they could be. And you could think, oh, they're 100% going to be wrong. Okay, but like they don't think so. So they're going to wait and see, and they're going to take their bets, right, with Zion McCollum. So I mean, the only name, and he's not even that good anymore. The only name that's out there is a free agent that you're like, break glass, right, in case of emergency situation, would be like a Patrick Peterson, right? He's played, he's familiar with Todd Bowles, but like Patrick Peterson's cooked, man. Like,
right?
Is he really any better than Zion McCollum? Like,
right. Well, you look at the Bucs and their history of signing veteran corners in times of need, because that's usually when they do it. Darrelle Revis doesn't necessarily have to be in this conversation because that was over a decade ago, but you look at Pat Peterson, you look at what he's capable of nowadays, and ultimately what the Bucs are going to need him to do. God forbid that turns into a Richard Sherman 2021 situation. Buccaneers legend Richard Sherman didn't have a lot of good things to say about the organization after he was let go that season, and he was vocal about how the Bucs just expected him to do maybe too much for his age when he was coming in during that season. So you talk about these temporary solutions, but does it become an even bigger problem down the stretch when you've got mismanagement and now an older guy who may not be available taking up a roster spot? Now, this is all stuff that you can't necessarily predict, but I would like to think that the Bucs, having past experience with this kind of thing, are hoping to try and navigate it differently. This was a lot of the same coaching staff. I know it was still Bruce Arians' team in 2021, but Todd Bowles and some of these guys are familiar with
the scheme hasn't changed,
right?
Like the scheme now. I mean, the thing is, it is new. Like I talked about Tavier Thomas, I talked about Bryce Hall. They're both new. I mean, they've only been here a couple months, so it's not like this is year 3 in the system for them. Like they are new, they are getting adjusted to it. It's just you'd like to see. Yeah, you see it'll be a little bit better because I think both of those guys could have roles in the regular season.
Yeah, Bryce Hall, the other corner you had talked about, had an interception last night that was waived for holding on that same play, but I think later on in that same drive, he got absolutely cooked. So he was not spared, just like the rest of the Buccaneers secondary. Made Mac Jones look great on that one drive that I had talked about. 17 plays, 82 yards. Mac Jones went 7 for 7, and the Jaguars took over 10 minutes off of the clock. It just can't happen. It cannot happen. You're going to wear your defense down, and it's going to lose you football games. No, this is preseason, but situational execution is what you want to see. And unfortunately, the secondary did not step up to the task last night for Tampa Bay. Let's wrap this thing up and talk about the special teams unit, because I can't believe we're talking about the special teams unit, but it's like the most fitting form of Tampa Bay Buccaneer news we have for you today talking about the special teams unit. We are talking about Chase McLaughlin, who missed a kick wide left last night, and Jake Camarda, who did not have a very good showing punting the football last night for Tampa Bay's special teams unit. These are both guys that after last season, I think had statistically one of the best special team seasons we've seen in the history of the franchise. Chase McLaughlin, the highest rated Buccaneers kicker of all time, and Jake Camarda, he's showing us more and more every season. That's a young leg that's continuing to grow. But your thoughts on where this special teams unit is? Todd Bowles said that they are not considering signing another place kicker. So Chase McLaughlin really he's got no choice but to figure it out here.
Dude, we are back. we are back. It's good to be back. It's good to, that pit in your stomach every time the kicker lines up. It was gone for a while, right? And I think it's time to bring it back. I kid, kind of, but look, I'm not overly concerned right now. But it is one thing, like, bro, like you're not doing anything different. Like, it's not like you're game planning for a kick differently in the preseason than you would be the regular season. So that's the worrying part, is like, maybe you just don't have it this year, and like McLaughlin, okay, so like throughout his career, McLaughlin was a decent kicker, but he was never as good as he was last year. Like
Right.
last year he was like insane. So last year was the career year. I'm not saying, oh, he's gonna revert to whatever, but is he gonna repeat what he did last year? Probably not. And that's okay, right? That's like, he doesn't have to do that, but you'd like to see a little more consistency, especially with, a 41 yarder.
Yeah.
You'd like to see that be a little more consistent. So the stuff, I think, inside of like 45, a lot of people say inside of 40. For me, it's in like, with a guy that has the leg that McLaughlin does, it's like the inside like 45. I think you'd like to see that be a little more consistent, and hopefully, hopefully he gets a few opportunities on Friday night against Miami, and hopefully he cashes them in to give a little more confidence. The punting, it is what it is. Sometimes you just mishit it. So I mean, it could be with McLaughlin too. Like, sometimes you just hit it in the wrong spot, whatever. But I'm not overly concerned about either, but something to keep an eye on. And if it happens in the regular season, if Chase McLaughlin goes out there and misses a 41-yarder in week 1 and the Bucs end up losing by 2, yeah, you're gonna have a serious conversation about it, right? It's not get rid of Chase McLaughlin, but it's something to monitor, basically. So I wouldn't be overly concerned. I wouldn't be pushing the panic button. The Buccaneers obviously are not pushing a panic button. I mean, they said they're not bringing in anybody, right? They never brought in anybody this entire offseason. They didn't bring in, not an undrafted free agent, like nobody like that. So I wouldn't push the panic button. However, it is just something to just keep an eye out on. That's all. Keep a close eye on his kicks on Friday night. That's all.
Buccaneers legend Rodrigo Blankenship, I think the last real competition he had, and Blankenship was here for maybe a cup of coffee. He was not here that long. So for Money Mac, you want to see him get back to that consistency, and you talked about the range as well. That's why the Bucs had brought him in and moved on from their previous kicker, was for that range. When you've got a guy that's automatic under 40 yards, that's great. But if he can't kick a 48-yarder without going wide left, then it's definitely going to be an issue. As far as Jake Camarda, young player, young punter, he's had a couple of bad games so far in the NFL. This is not the first time we have talked about a bad game for Jake Camarda, but hoping he can get some things ironed out between now and next Friday's preseason game between the Bucs and the Miami Dolphins. Bucs going to be at home for the first and only time this preseason. So the Glazers will definitely charge you full price for that ticket, but it should be a good time. Always love seeing the Buccaneers play at home, and you'll get your first look of the preseason at a lot of the premier players on this Buccaneers squad. Baker Mayfield, maybe Mike Evans, maybe some Chris Godwin, maybe Trey Palmer getting featured a little bit more in this offense as the game goes on. On the defensive side of the ball, Will Gholston, while we are talking about veterans, Will Gholston was in that game.
He's playing, man.
Hell.
He's playing.
Yeah, I mean, he is playing. Had a tackle last night, popped up sometime in the fourth quarter, and I was stunned to see him out there. Also, the longest tenured Tampa Bay Buccaneer on the roster. They drafted him in 2013, so he is headed into...
He's not.
Who is?
It's Lavonte David.
Oh, 2012.
No,
you're right.
drafted in 2012.
Excuse me. You're right. They got Gholston in 13. My mistake. I'm surprised that went right over my head.
It feels like Gholston was drafted in 2008, but...
Yeah, no, it feels like he's been on this team forever. I was talking with JC Allen last week about it. It's so funny because Will Gholston has gone through so many phases of his career as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And one of the things that I had brought up is that felt like forever they were trying to make him a 4-3 defensive end. They were trying to put him on the edge.
That's what he was drafted as, yeah.
Yeah, and it just didn't work. But he definitely had a resurgence when he got kicked into the interior, put on a little bit more weight. Todd Bowles getting the most out of him. But yeah, he's playing his ass off.
I think it's because you're like, all right, this is his last year, and then he comes back. And you're like, okay, all right, well, he came back for this one. Then this is his last year. Okay, then he comes back, but he just never dies. He doesn't go away.
He's like the Energizer Bunny. I don't remember if it was this year or last year. I think it may have been last year, but he waited to sign his contract until after training camp was over. I don't know if that happened again this year. I don't know how early the Bucs had him ironed in to come back.
I think he did play in the preseason a little bit last year.
Yeah. So I want to say he's just getting those extra reps, but dude, when you've got a 33-year-old defensive lineman who's out there giving it his all in the fourth quarter, got to show some love to Gholston. And 5 sacks on the night for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Fun fact, Tampa Bay's 5 sacks versus Jacksonville are tied for the most in a single preseason game, or for the Buccaneers preseason game, since they started tracking preseason stats in 2017, which is a crazy stat in itself, to be honest with you. And also, the 5 sacks on Saturday night are the second most by any team so far in the 2024 preseason. So some of these young guys that we talked about, Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez in particular, hoping they continue to step up next week against the Dolphins, but we will get a look at some Buccaneer starters beforehand, so curious to see how that goes. But ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out with us live over on YouTube. For anyone that I may have missed, Al Bundy in the chat, Richard T from the
West Coast. He can't do it. I'm saying we can't do it like he can.
No, it's always the dramatic pause for effect is my favorite part of the entire bit. It gets longer every single time. Mikey Kelly, who just celebrated a birthday this weekend. Happy birthday, my friend Neil L. Robinson Crusoe, our good buddy Donnie, and Roger Morrow. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Follow the show on social media. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. You got anything in the hopper this week?
Yeah, so I did it last week after the Bengals game. I'm going to do it again this week. Something I started called Standouts. It's just basically the most impressive players. Just wanted to put a different name on it. So stay tuned for that. Should be out at some point today, which is Sunday, or when we're recording this, or at the latest, probably Monday. So keep an eye out for that.
Last but not least, you can find myself, Instagram, and Twitter at Retticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. Don't forget to find us on Autograph. Download the Autograph app today. Use promo code BUCS, BUCS, at sign up, and get free access to one of the coolest Buccaneer news communities I have seen since we started doing this show. You know, we've gotten a chance to use a lot of apps. A lot of people have come and gone with their idea of what a sports community should be. And I think Tom Brady, TB12, and the great team over at Autograph have absolutely nailed it. So check that out. We got plenty of content for you guys the rest of this week between now and that final preseason game on Friday night. Should be a good one. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you again, as always, for listening. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off from my co-host, Evan Wanish. We'll talk to you in the next episode. Until then, and as always, we appreciate you hanging out, and go Bucs.